So we are in a moment right now with COVID-19, with the nationwide protests and violence, where no one can feel truly safe. But Black children, Black mothers and fathers and sisters and brothers rightfully feel more threatened than others. And trust, which was already fragile, is broken in many places as children ask themselves, will I be safe running down a street? Will I be safe sitting on my porch? And will I feel safe walking into my school? This is going to present an enormous challenge when children return to classrooms. How can you learn if your brain keeps thinking, watch out, watch out? Knowing this, how can schools reopen with strength, with humanity, and with confidence? I believe we can open our school doors with strength by doing our part to see the brilliance in each and every child and unleash it. I believe we can open with purpose because as educators, you have superpowers. As leaders, as citizens, to also build toward a better system because of this disruption. Before COVID and the events of the past few weeks, if I had had this opportunity to talk to you about human development, the development of the brain and learning science, I would have begun with this. Each of us has 20,000 genes in our human genome. Yet in our lifetime, fewer than 10% of these genes will ever get expressed. So what do you think determines what's in that 10%? It's context. The environments, experiences, and relationships in our lives. Context that we are exposed to is the primary driver of who we become, including the expression of our genes. These processes are part of the science of epigenetics. Epi means above. The things which are above the genes, that influence what our genes actually do. The risks and opportunities in development and evolution sit inside this one profoundly important point, that there is no separation between nature and nurture, biology and environment, brain and behavior, only a collaboration between them. And this means our lives are not predetermined by a genetic program. Genes are chemical followers. They're little packages of protein covered with receptors that are triggered into expression by the environments, experiences, and relationships of our lives. And epigenetic adaptation is about the biologic processes through which relationships and experiences get under the skin and influence lifelong learning and health. So if nurture drives nature, there is both good and bad news in that. It means that our brains are a living structure made up of tissue that is the most susceptible to change from experience of any tissue in the human body. So as Jennifer said, my organization, Turnaround for Children, was founded in the aftermath of the 9/11 attacks. At the time, I was a practicing child psychiatrist specializing in trauma. Turnaround was founded on a single core insight, that adversity doesn't just happen to children, it happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. So I want to tell you what we learned after 9/11, and then I will tell you how this applies and doesn't apply to what we are experiencing in this time of racial trauma and unrest, layered onto the COVID-19 pandemic. In the immediate aftermath of 9/11, I was asked to help lead a study to assess the impact of 9/11 on New York City's public school children. And the finding that surprised all of us at the time was that the most startling effects on children were not in the ground zero schools. They were in the children in schools in the communities of deepest poverty. I walked into a first grade class in the South Bronx in an elementary school, where a teacher had asked her kids to do a drawing to help them digest the 9/11 event. A little boy named Thomas, who couldn't have been more than 6 years old, walked up to me with his drawing. And in it, there were these two little boxes with smoke coming out. But in the foreground were two stick figure drawings of boys with guns pointed at each other. Thomas's drawing carried a message. It said, "I'm scared of the violence I see every day when I come to school. I'm scared to come to school, and 9/11 is very far away." It was the immediate local context of this child's life that was producing fear and stress and activating the biologic mechanisms we're going to be talking about. And not surprisingly, these symptoms were most intense where the system had been activated before because of prior trauma. Today, the stress and trauma that children are witnessing and feeling is all around us. It is on our city streets, it's in front of the White House, it's in our homes, on TV, and social media 24/7. And many children today feel like Thomas, especially if they are Black and brown children. But unlike 9/11, the pandemic is happening to all of us. It has hit my own household. And I am very aware, though, that it has hit vulnerable communities the hardest, with much higher rates of serious illness and death. 9/11 was one horrible day, but COVID-19 has now been with us for months, and it will likely be with us in some form for a long time to come. So we have a pandemic inside the pandemic, where the combined effects of COVID, economic hardship, and racial injustice have dramatically escalated the inequities I know we knew were there and magnified the uncertainties about what is ahead. That 1 in 3 parents of infants and toddlers are skipping or reducing meals. That 9 million students do not have access to broadband. That all of this is concentrated in low-income communities are powerful indicators of the injustices of today and the risks to health and academic growth that they carry. In addition to all of this, and Chris said this, there is a unique paradox in the time of COVID, and that is that to keep ourselves physically safe, we need to be physically distant. And this has disrupted the crucial connections to teachers and friends and communities of faith and even family members, the very connections we need to feel safe, manage stress and fear, and build our resilience. And the crisis of trust that people, particularly young people of color, are witnessing and experiencing right now, where those who should protect them don't, won't, or can't. Today, trust is broken. So when trust and safety are broken, our bodies and our minds are seized by stress. So we have to talk about the biology of stress and what it does to us, and particularly, we have to talk about the limbic system, which is the learning and emotion center of the brain. We know that stress is the most common naturally occurring example of negative context. When we experience stress, cortisol is released through our bodies and our brains, and it produces that feeling of fight, flight, freeze. We've all had it. It's intense when it happens. But if the stress is mild or tolerable, it's adaptive. It makes us sharper, it makes us alert, and it helps us prepare for an event like a test performance. This is our limbic system at work. Attention, concentration, focus, memory, preparation. But when children have persistently high levels of stress, and that stress is not buffered by the presence of a trusted and calm adult, something else can happen. Children can get locked in that fight or flight feeling where it just won't let up. And that's the condition known as toxic stress. Cortisol can do harm to the structures of the limbic system because adversity doesn't just happen to children. It happens inside their brains and bodies through the biologic mechanism of stress. But fortunately, that's not the upside, the end of the story. There is a huge upside when we turn to another hormone, the hormone oxytocin. This is the hormonal system that produces feelings of trust, love, attachment, and safety. And that's not all. Oxytocin hits the same structures in the brain as cortisol, yet oxytocin is the more powerful hormone, particularly at the level of the cell. It can literally protect children from the damaging effects of cortisol and help children not only manage stress, but produce resilience to future stress. So relationships that are strong and positive and cause the release of oxytocin will not only help children in the moment, but it will provide them with resilience. In fact, the human relationship and oxytocin are the most powerful examples we have of positive context. So there are only 3 things you need to remember about brain development: the astounding malleability of the brain, experience-dependent growth, and the role of context. And because of this, there's no such thing as a developing child independent of context. And it is this single point that carries the extraordinary opportunity we have. Because if we can build environments in our classrooms, our schools, and even our homes that help our children cope with stress, build resilience, and develop the interests and passions and skills and mindsets to flourish in this world, this is what we're going to talk about right now, this opportunity. So I bet many of you are familiar with the famous Marshmallow Test. It was a test conducted a long time ago in the 70s in a nursery school in Stanford. Nursery school children were put in a room with a marshmallow and they were presented with a choice: eat the marshmallow now or wait 15 minutes and get a second marshmallow. Now, the research findings on the children who could delay gratification and exert self-control for that length of time were correlated with success in school, higher SAT scores, and college acceptance, and even later life success. But now, fast forward to 2012. Dr. Celeste Kidd, a researcher then at the University of Rochester, who had worked in a homeless shelter, asked herself a question: would the kids in my homeless shelter have ever waited to get that second marshmallow? So the researcher repeated the test under a different set of conditions. She put the children in a room with broken crayons, and she promised to come back with brand new ones. And in half the cases, that's what she did, and the children got new crayons. But in half, the researcher came back and said, "Sorry, I couldn't do it after all." And then she repeated the marshmallow test. And what do you think happened? The kids who got the new crayons, where the promise was kept, waited, no problem, to get that second marshmallow. But the kids where the promise was broken gobbled up the one in front of them right away. So the ability to delay gratification, it turns out, had a lot to do with whether you trusted the person giving you the marshmallow. But here's what's so incredibly important about what Dr. Kidd did. She challenged the assumptions in the original test, and she made the leap to understanding that self-control, this skill that is so important to learning, is not just in the child. It is in the child in a context that was designed to reveal the skill. In this case, through the experience of a trustful relationship. This researcher altered the microenvironment around these children, and by doing that, was able to reveal the skill, the malleable skill of self-control that these children actually had. She did this by establishing trust with them. Now think about what this story means about the environments we could create to reveal the potential skills and talents that exist in all young people. And think about the talents we as adults often don't see and won't see unless we design the environments to reveal them. So how do we do that? Well, the science calls for a design mapped to the way the brain learns, a design that combines 5 elements: positive relationships, environments filled with safety and belonging, integrated and comprehensive supports, the intentional development of the skills, mindsets, and habits that all successful learners have, and rich, meaningful instructional experiences where students discover what they're capable of. The development of a whole child emerges when we combine these 5 elements into experiences that connect to one another. And if you want to picture this, picture a shape like a web of experiences, because this is how our brains actually develop. Lots of connections that happen between the structures of the brain, and these connections produce increasingly complex skills. I think every one of you knows that there has historically been a false choice in education between the things we need to do on social and emotional development, physical and mental health, and the pursuit of academic excellence. But not today. Today we know that a healthy context for learning requires attention to young people's safety, health, mental health, social, emotional, and cognitive development, academic skills, identity, and agency. Not some of these things. Environments that build all of these things. It is all one developmental story, and the non-negotiables for whole child design will cover all of these important bases for you and for our young people, especially now. The neurobiologic story here is simple. The brain is malleable, and as we said, it is the tissue in the body that is most susceptible to change from the experience of any tissue in the human body. A brain under stress will be shut down. It can't focus and concentrate, and it doesn't have much in the way of working memory, and it is easily triggered by emotion. And the way our brains are wired, it is our emotions that drive our cognitive and learning skills. It is our emotions that engage us or shut us down. So today, in this time of COVID-19 and violence and racism and extreme inequity, we have no choice. The path to a calm classroom is a calm brain. The path to learning is a calm brain. And the path to both of these is to prioritize activities that build relationships, establish routines, and promote resilience. What we are calling a turnaround, the new 3 R's, which are all drawn from the science that builds toward the non-negotiables for whole child design that I spoke about. 3 R's, relationships, routines, and resilience for today and tomorrow. Relationships. Relationships are the active ingredient in the learning environment because they are the way trust is built, oxytocin is released, and the limbic system activated. You now know all of these mechanisms. And in fact, trust is the antidote to stress, and relationships are the medium through which we experience trust. Routines. I don't know whether you know this, but the brain is actually a prediction machine that loves order. It is calm when things are orderly and it knows what's coming next, but it gets anxious and agitated when things are not predictable. So our task is to build consistent routines in our environments, whether those are in school or classroom or home. And resilience. Building resilience is likely the most important task we have for ourselves and our kids. But among the incredible things I learned in our fishbowl is that there are kids that you all know that are already demonstrating extraordinary resilience. They are taking care of their parents and their younger siblings. They are working in addition to trying to keep up with their studies. That's resilience. But we are and can, at times, ask an awful lot of our kids. And we have to take some of those burdens away. But I don't know whether you realize that resilience is not a trait like eye color. It is actually something you can build, and you can build on the assets and strengths that we know we already have, that our kids have. And the key to growing resilience is building regulation skills, whether those are physical through movement, emotional, behavioral, or cognitive, through co-regulating experiences that we have with one another. But here's the secret sauce in all of this. We said that the brain is a dynamic living structure. It's also an electrical structure and the fuel for brain development. Literally, the fuel that drives the electrical activity that happens between neurons comes from relationships. The brain becomes more and more wired because it is stimulated by relationships and rich learning experiences, and preferably predictable experiences. Well, routines like these will build the wiring that produces complex skills, whether those skills are reading or resilience. And implementing the 3 R's will mean that the majority of kids in your school will do better, will engage better as learners, will become more resilient, and the number of kids who will need individual interventions or who emerge in crisis will go down. This is why we have picked these 3 R's as the most important priorities and practices to focus on. Now, you may know all of this. You realize that I haven't used the word trauma all that often, even though I know that the experiences going on today are traumatic to kids and adults. But the word trauma is a stigma to children who have it. No one who has it wants to be known as having it. No one wants to be taught by someone where they feel they've been labeled. This sets up a relationship that is deficit-oriented right from the beginning. What we need to know is that trauma causes a disruption in our lives, a disruption to health, to mood, to behavior, to skill development, and to learning. And it can happen to any of us. But what our kids want to know is that it can be fixed without stigma and without shame. And the key to that is strong, positive, developmental relationships. So after you have some time to discuss all the things that you've heard from me, from your colleagues, Gretchen will take you through an exercise where you begin to see how to apply these things in sample kinds of practices that will bring the 3 R's to life for you and for your students. Thank you so much for giving me the chance to talk to you.